Hi and hello, watch fans, and welcome to another edition of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighborhood watchmaker, Rob Nuts. Today, my regular co-host, Alan Ben-Joseph, is absent from the studio, but I am joined by Martin Klocke of Sherpa Watches to tell us his story of how he has brought an iconic model back to the fore. Firstly, Martin, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Rob. Very nice that I have the chance to appear here.
So tell the audience where we met and how recently our friendship was forged.
Oh, that was actually quite surprising. So we met last weekend on the brilliant watch show Finland in Helsinki, and which is a really nice show. I can already recommend because they are nice people. And also there is Kari Voutilainen, which is always worth traveling anywhere. And a lot of enthusiasts. And we were introduced by Albert from Zeitwinkel. And, well, we started talking. And then suddenly I'm here in the show.
Quite a fortuitous timing, to be honest, because as I mentioned to you before we came on air, we've got a very busy recording schedule all the way up to the middle of July, but it just so happened both you and I had an hour or so spare on today, which is Friday, May 19th. So this episode's probably going to come out a ways in the future, but I'm sure everything you say today will be just as relevant then. Tell us about your experience at the Watch Show Finland, because for me, it was the best event I've been to for years. Not since the heydays of Salon QP have I known a better event. How did you find it?
So basically, I appeared at the Watch Show Finland last year for the first time, and I had a completely different idea how Finns would be on a show or in general. But back then I was surprised. They came directly to the booth, asked tons of questions, very curious, very knowledgeable, very passionate about watches. And wow, I was just blown away. So that's why I returned. And as you can imagine, I mean, it continued because they are just easygoing, come to the booth, ask a lot of questions, no prejudice, nothing like my brand that I have on my wrist is better than your watches that you present or something like that, which honestly speaking does happen in some other events. So yeah, I was really, pleased with the run of events. And the other thing is the organizer, Ville, he's working for Sapaneva and is really a nice guy, very passionate. And also the whole Sapaneva crew is really nice. And so, yeah, it feels a bit like a family event, to be honest.
I think the word that sticks out to me more than any when we're describing the clientele of that event was knowledgeable. That's the thing that really resonated with me, just how into the watchmaking game, how deeply into it these men and women that we met were. And it's interesting you sort of say that you had a different perception of what the finish would be like in that environment, as I did a few years ago before I'd ever worked in Finland, and I went out to do some training sessions with a team at Asman Kello, and I was greeted with a room full of blank faces and a very respectful but somewhat unnerving silence for the majority of my talk. Honestly, I thought that I was bombing. I thought it was the worst possible reaction, that they hated me, and then it wasn't until I finished that they all came up to me individually and thanked me earnestly and said it was a fantastic and informative talk, and they're very grateful for it. Just exceptionally polite. But the truth of the matter is the Finns don't really go in for small talk, and that's fair enough, but you don't actually have as much small talk as one might normally encounter upon a first meeting at a watch fair, because of course we're all there because we love watches, and so the first hurdle has already been leaped over, and they got into it. I mean, yeah, they're great. They're a great bunch. And I was just really impressed, because every watch brand, especially brands like Sherpa and Argonaut, for whom I work most of the time, have to be so careful about where they spend their money when it comes to advertising a brand and getting out there into the world and meeting people. And putting your money into an event, it can be a hit or it can be a miss. And having that kind of engaged audience that not only was interested but understood everything that I fed back to them was wonderful. It made me feel like that's the smartest investment we've made all year. How does that feel for you? Because I guess Sherpa is relatively new back on the scene and certainly new in this current guise. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to the brand, your background before that, and what it's like, managing a new formed company?
Wow, the complex bunch of questions, but basically I'm a watch lover, not for so long. I would guess like 2010, 2011. I stumbled upon the old Enica watches while looking for a watch for my wife, and I bought actually on eBay. Back then, still a viable platform for buying watches. I bought a very small lady dive watch with internal dive bezel from Enicar, maybe around 29 millimeters in size, so tiny. And then started venturing into vintage watches because I just discovered them more or less, and started buying several watches, mostly underdog brands, which I tend to prefer. So, and then I bought several Enicar models. And well, after a while of collecting also whatever pullover Accutron watches of the past with the tuning fork movements and then some other odd things, I started wondering why these really nice Enicar Sherpa models just disappeared and nobody took them up again. Just to find out that in '88, Enicar went bankrupt. The same goes, by the way, for the best and biggest case maker in the watch industry, EPSA or Alvin Piqueret, who made the cases for Enicar and for many others too. So they went both bankrupt in '88 or '89, and Enicar brand or trademark rights were bought by a Hong Kong Chinese holding, Huaming Hong Holding. So I looked what they are doing at the moment, but they do not take up any of the history of the past. No, none of the models, especially not the Sherpa series, was really brought back to the market. And I thought, well, that's, I wouldn't say sorely needed, but they are so great and timeless in design that I thought they should be back on the market. So I wrote a very nice letter to them. I think that was the end of 2018 when I thought I may do something new in my life. And a friend of mine posted it in Hong Kong with a receipt, and you could see that they received the letter, but they never responded. So that was at that time the end. I thought, quite a nice idea, but well, then I can't do it. I'm an engineer by study, so I studied mechanical engineering. I work in the automotive industry, mostly plastics for automotive, so a lot of structural parts in cars, very big parts usually. And I advise as a more or less like technical sales guy, companies, what kind of materials to choose for what application, etc. So I'm not in the watch industry, so I didn't really see a chance, and I didn't intend to found my own company. But then a friend of mine, he's a business consultant, he always tells other people what to do. He told me, "Oh, Martin, then you have to do it yourself." And I thought, you're crazy, I'm an engineer, but I can't build watches, and I didn't have experience. But it just stayed in the back of my mind all the time. And then I started researching, and I found out, okay, Enicar as a brand is gone, registered. But I found out Sherpa, the sub-brand of Enicar, where most of the best watches of Enicar were actually done under the sub-brand, was available. So I registered that in Europe, in the EU, and started thinking and tinkering more what I could do and how I could do it. And then friends of mine and myself, we went to Switzerland for a small watch tour. A friend of mine organized that, and he had some contacts to Fortis. So we visited Fortis at the time when Jupp, the new owner, just took over. A really nice guy. I think you know him, right?
One of my best friends, yeah.
He's a super nice guy. And there was, he just, I don't know how many months he just took over, but we were there and we were led around the company very transparently, very friendly, open, super nice discussions. And I found out, well, that's a very small company. I counted the people at that time. And I thought, wow, I thought watch companies were a lot bigger. And if those guys can do Fortis, maybe I have a chance. And I found out through them that there are even possibilities like private label companies. I mean, I was a complete outsider, so I didn't know. So after that visit, I was really inspired, and I always tell Jupp every time I meet him that this really inspired me, and we still have contact, which is really nice. So that was one point, and then later at that tour, we went to Kari Voutilainen's villa at that time, not the new one he has, but a smaller one. We were also led around the company for 2 hours or so. And these things I picked up and thought, wow, it is a possibility.
And right from the very beginning, you were obviously aware that the most important thing in watchmaking, if you're going to make it, especially as an outsider with very little behind the curtain experience of the industry, is that relationships are the most important thing. And thanks to the transparency and the friendship shown to you by Joop and by Kari, you were able to get that spark of inspiration and thought, you know what, maybe I can do this as well.
Yeah, it is. I didn't see it like that, but maybe my way of doing things is like this also. I mean, now I found out, of course. I mean, as you're completely right, it's a lot about relationships, knowing the right people, getting references. So in a way, everything just came together. For example, I visited Kari Voutilainen's workshop, and in the downstairs compartment, they had the guilloche machines, yeah? 1 year later, I was at the Watch Time Düsseldorf, and I saw Benzinger. Yeah, Benzinger is also a specialist for guilloche, and he had the same machine, and I started talking to him because I told him, I saw that machine with Kari Voutilainen, and he said, maybe I sold one to him because Benzinger picked up all the old machines that were disposed of in Pforzheim when guilloche was not in trend anymore. So
wow,
he's he's also another really great guy, worth doing a show with, I would guess. And so then that was it. So I met him because I met Kari Voutilainen and saw the machine. Then Benzinger told me, when I told him that I want to do something with watches and I needed some case maker, he said, I've got somebody here. So he introduced me to Mr. Koch. Mr. Koch has the company RP Uhrengehäuse and also a second company, RM Lifestyle. And he's doing with the RP company all the cases for Glashütte Original, very high quality cases. Nice. And some other companies too. So I met Mr. Koch. So, I mean, that was always like this, like a chain of events. So then Mr. Koch told me, I can't do the whole thing. So you need a designer and then we can talk again. So I researched on how could support me with design, etc. So it basically, as you said, was a chain of events. I met one guy and he referenced me to another one. And then it was a build-up of relationships.
And this journey began in 2018?
I would guess the journey began in 2019. So 2018 was the time when I thought about it, when I wrote to the Hong Kong holding. But when I started thinking in more detail was 2019. And the first idea was actually to have a private label company do everything for me because I have a day job. And I thought, I can't do the whole thing. I need help.
But you moved away from that when you made the connections that you needed?
No, I moved away from that when I researched all the details about the old watches. So,
I see.
I researched about the Enica Sherpa models. I thought, why? I mean, they have 2 crowns, they have the internal turning bezel, they have a special bayonet closing system. So I researched and I found out it's not standard tech. So they had a compressor system case back, a special one. And I also found out that the crowns are very special. They were non-screw. They didn't have normal gaskets, like rubber gaskets. Some of the crowns are still watertight after 60 years.
Good grief.
So I thought it's something special. And I also found out that the private label companies cannot help me there. They have, even when they're really good, they have their own, let's say, standard catalog of many things. So I also thought it would be better if I have everything in my hand and do it.
Yeah, well, it certainly is better, but I mean, it's a massive undertaking. There's a reason why those private label companies have such success with their stock catalogs as they are, because most brands, well, when they understand the challenge of what perhaps they've set out to do, most of them shy away from it because it's a daunting hill to climb. But, given the name of the brand, there isn't a better brand made for climbing hills. So
there are many hills on the way, by the way.
I can imagine. But look, you mentioned one very, very key word here, and it's something that I think you should spend as long as you need to fully explain it on so our audience understands it, you called this watch a compressor. Yeah, the word compressor is used very often in the industry almost as a design corollary to describe a watch with two crowns, one at 2 and one at 4, because it was quite often the case that true compressors would have this crown formation, but a true compressor actually has nothing to do with the crown formation or to do with the case construction. So go on, give us your expert insight into what a compressor watch actually is.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you know more than 99% of people about that, so which is quite interesting. I mean, for me also, I started like that. Basically, a compressor watch is a watch that has a system which tightens the seals, the gaskets, by using the water pressure. So the water pressure will tighten the seals when diving down. And this applies to the crowns and to the case back. But it doesn't have to do anything with two crowns, internal turning bezel. That's another addition. So basically, it started like this. EPSA faced the challenge in the 1950s. It goes back to the 1950s. That at that time, the gasket technology was very fragile. Some used different materials were used. A lot of experimentations were done. People were not very happy in the 1950s with the gaskets because they tended to fade away. So many materials out of the plastic and rubber family at that time would fade away or wither away under pressure. So if you turn and close the case back, screw down case back to according to the pressure you need for 200 meters, many gaskets at that time would be pressed in more or less after a while, which would mean that the pressure on the gasket, which is necessary to be watertight, would fade away. And a fading away pressure on the gasket would mean there's quite a danger that, let's say, after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, water could intrude. So, this is why one of the reasons I brought back this system, because the idea was so ingenious. So basically EPSA said, or the head of EPSA actually was a family which was quite innovative. They wrote about 220 patents just for cases and related technology. He said, why do we have the pressure on the gasket all the time? Because the pressure on the gasket all the time means problems on the long run. We only need the pressure when we're actually diving. So the compressor case back was constructed such that it would not put pressure on the gasket all the time, but when you dive down, the water would press in the case back further into the case, ensuring that the pressure on the gasket would rise proportionally with rising water pressure. And that was basically what was called compressor. They had different, I think 4 or 5 different designs. One was a very simple snap fit case back. Then they had a bayonet compressor, which was only used for Enica, and which I recreated in a better way. And then they had, which is probably the most famous, the super compressor, which was a screw-in case back, but it was the pressure on the gasket was controlled by a spring. And then they had a very special system called Compressor 2, which was actually the first case for the Hoya Monaco. Many people don't know, but it was probably the first really watertight, squarish case, which was also done by EPSA. And they have for the case back, etc., for the whole case, they have a pattern on this.
Well, I'm not surprised, because one of the craziest things about the Monaco when it comes to securing a decent water resistance is that square crystal and the square gasket that goes alongside it. So EPSA really did have the inside track when it came to gasket technology. That's amazing. You know, funny thing to raise on the subject of water resistance, because of course there are many brands, in fact most, that have at least some water resistance about their watches, we should hope. And there are many that hang their hat on being diving brands or tool watches or adventure watches or even field watches that require a decent water resistance to be used safely in the wild. But there are very few people I know who I would regard as an expert on this subject. And one of the funny things I've noticed throughout my career, and having people ask me questions about it many, many times, is that people tend to place the importance of certain components far higher than they need to be placed in the hierarchy of water resistance when it comes down to what actually matters. So my friends, they say to me, oh, why is a Nomos Metro only water resistant to like 50 meters? Why can't now in the modern world they make a watch that is just water resistant to 1,000 meters regardless? What's wrong with this gasket technology? And I said, well, the thing is, it isn't always about just the gaskets. A lot of watchmaking, in fact, everything about watchmaking is about the interaction of components and the interaction of those components with their surrounding environments. And so there's nothing wrong with the gaskets in a Nomos. The problem is the thinness of the case and the size of the case.
Yes.
And the fact that like the further down you go in water, and this is perfectly expressed by the concept of a compressor, the more the external pressure is going to weigh on that watch. Now, the reason why an Omega Ploprof is built like a tank is not necessarily so it can have gaskets 4 times thicker than the average watch. It does have big gaskets, but the early Proprofs had a closed case back. The modern ones have an open case back, and they haven't lost any water resistance because of that, because the gasket technology is there. But the real key thing is the fact that that housing is so strong, it can resist the environment around it. Its wide dive watches are massive. And so when you look at the gaskets in a dress watch, nothing wrong with them from daily wear. And even a dive watch, even a watch built to survive 1,000 meters, is probably more likely to leak in the first 30 centimeters of submersion than it is beyond that until it reaches its limit. And your endeavor with Sherpa and the fact that you have so genuinely brought back a technology that many people reference and many people feed off because they like the aesthetic that is commonly, although erroneously, associated with it, to bring to life a product that actually does what the original did and to be the standard bearer for that now is absolutely fascinating. I guess you take that role quite seriously.
Yeah, I thought if I bring back these watches, I want to bring them in the intended form. So they look like compressor watches, and in my opinion, they should be compressor watches. So basically, I took the legacy of Enica and the legacy of EPSA and wanted to bring both of them because both companies mean something for me. They touched me in the way they operated. I thought both of them were in each case quite brilliant and had very special things among them. And so, yes, I researched. I found out it's a special case back system, and the crowns are even more special because actually there are now 2 companies supposedly doing compressor design case backs again, which was first shocking to me because I was in the middle of my development, and then which was it? Christopher Ward brought out a model inspired by old compressor watches, and they have this case back which is claimed to be a super compressor case back. And then also another German brand, Circular, came out with a concept. Watches of very different price point and design, no, of course. But then I thought, oh shit! I mean, what am I doing? You know, why am I continuing? But then I found out basically they're not doing the crowns, which is then lacking one component, I would say, of a real compressor watch. And so the crowns were actually something that was the most challenging because I had to find out how they were made. And EPSA still had, they have 200 patents. I researched them all online. And I looked at the drawings. I'm an engineer, luckily, so I can read drawings and patents. I've written many patents in my life myself, so I know how they work. So basically, you protect something that you invented, but you tell enough to get it patented and protected, but you don't tell so much that people can actually do it. Yeah, that's basically how patents work. And the patent itself didn't tell me enough, so I read a book about EPSA. There's actually one book where EPSA is mentioned, of course, written in French, which was a challenge for me because I only have my poor school French. And within the book, there were some references to archives in Switzerland. So actually, I went on a tour to research, meet some suppliers, etc. So I went to a special archive in Switzerland, and in that archive, there was the personal a personal archive by the technical head of EPSA. And even there were not so many things to be read, how these components work. But I was very lucky. His daughter had to spend time working in the company, I think maybe from school or maybe from university. And about that time within the company, she had, poor thing, I mean, she had to write a report on the typewriter, with drawings made by hand. So it must have been a huge effort to do that. And within that report, she actually described this crown, how it worked, described some details about the manufacturing. And so I knew after that how things were done. So yes, I took it very seriously. And then I found a drawing, a component drawing of that with the name of the manufacturer of the crown back then. And I researched on Google and I found the company still in operation today. I was like, really, it was like a celebration. I thought, wow, I don't have to do it myself, so I can, call them. I called them, of course, only in French, because in the Francophone Swiss, even if they can speak German really well, they won't talk to you in German. They're quite proud, so they talk French. And it's okay. So I called them, I told them drawing number such and such. Do you still have can you make the crown? And they said, yeah, no problem. Give us the drawing number. We'll go to the archive. We meet in 2 weeks. So I drove down to Geneva. I met them, really nice guys, meeting room, 3 people, 5 drawings on the table. And before I could start asking some questions, which I really had, they asked me, Mr. Klocke, before we go on, could you tell us what this is? And I thought, come on, I mean, that's the wrong dream, I'm here to ask questions. Yeah, it's the other way around. But apparently, they lost all knowledge after several decades. They didn't even know what this was, how it worked. Okay. Maybe they were not to blame, to be honest, because sometimes, because the technology was developed by EPSA, it could have been that the crown maker was just making them build to print. Maybe. I don't know. This happens also in the automotive industry. Sometimes people build things just as it is in the drawing, and they don't know what it is.
Right. Well, to be honest, that sort of is a microcosmic example of the thing that I'm most scared of with the future of, civilization, I suppose.
True.
You know what I mean? Like, especially with AI on the rise, like there is going to be a lot of things that we can do by pressing the button, but there'll be fewer and fewer people around that actually understand how those things work. And to be quite frank, I regard myself as very fortunate for having found watchmaking at the age I did and fallen in love with it, because I feel like it's one of those more resilient bastions of artisanal craft that will remain a little longer than many other occupations and industries. In fact, I read an article the other day about the 3 areas of occupation that would be the last to be overtaken by AI, and I think watchmaking kind of fulfilled all 3. It was like an industry that requires true inventive and innovative design. It required some artisanal handcraft, and it relied upon human interaction. So yeah, those 3 things I remembered from the article. All 3 I thought, wow, this is watchmaking. So thank goodness, even if the AI technology increases apace in the next couple of years, and we're actually going to have a full-on episode dedicated to AI in watchmaking in the next couple of weeks. It might come out before this episode does.
Oh, wow.
So you should go and listen to it, because we have some very, very strong opinions in the real-time network, which, just so you and so your listeners, your existing brand followers know, we have a WhatsApp group, and you're welcome to join if you like, Martin, where we have all sorts of people, all our listeners, but from all different strata of the industry. We've got designers, creative directors, brand heads, collectors, watchmakers, master watchmakers, and just passing watch fans. And we have an ongoing discussion off air about what topics we should cover and what we should talk about and what people think of X, Y, Z. And so you should join in and you should listen to this AI episode, because it was raised the other day by Miles, one of our members in the group, and the conversation blew up. It was insane, because there's a lot of strong feelings about what's okay and what's not. But I have to say, I think you would be definitely a champion for traditionalists in the group, because you are doing things the right way and you're bringing back a technology and improving it in some ways. You did mention that you improved certain aspects of the system. So give us a detailed insight into what you mean by that. How did you identify something that could be made better?
Okay, so basically I first found out how to do it and how the components were, composed of. Basically, we ended up with that conversation in the crown maker who didn't know how to do it anymore. They didn't have any tools anymore. And that was just in 2019, I think, maybe even 2019, 20 sometimes, when I started that in detail. And they didn't want to continue. They didn't want to follow up with that project. They didn't want to bring out that kind of crown again because they thought, only crazy guys like me would like to have it, so why do it? But they were incredibly kind and supportive in the way that I got all the component drawings from the 1950s from them, which was amazing. So I got the component drawings. By that time I knew how it would work. And then I started to source this with another crown maker, but they gave me a crazy offer, which was more like a offer that they didn't want to do because it was so crazy, really expensive. And by that time, I had a designer, industrial designer doing the aesthetic design of the watch, and he introduced me to Cyrano Devonté. He's got an engineering office together with a colleague, Dominique Bouza, and both of them, they have the watch brand Oscillon. I don't know, maybe you know it. It's a brand where they do everything without computers. Yeah. So he's a guy who knows how to do things, and he went through with me through the design of the crowns, and he told me, we are doing they did a lot of engineering for Uhrwerk. And he said, at Uhrwerk, we're doing new things every day. And why don't you do the crowns yourself? So to make a long story short, I ended up doing the crowns. So we basically took the old design and adapted it slightly for manufacturing reasons. We did some updates in materials. For example, there's a spring inside of the crown. It used to be glycine. Glycine is a material which is not favored anymore for anything that could be in contact with skin, because I think beryllium is inside, which is not so nice. Nowadays, you have springs out of stainless steel. Then there is the gasket, which is actually some kind of cylindric system, which is put over the tube. And if water pressure is coming, it will press this gasket onto the tube, making it, in a way, infinitesimal waterproof, because the more water pressure, the tighter it gets. But I would guess there's some kind of limit. So this material was back then some special plastic. And I'm in the plastic industry, so I was looking for a, let's say, more modern material, which I then also found and introduced. So yes, I would say in a way we adapted slightly the design, and we chose more modern materials, which at that time were not available.
Very good. I mean, that's a smart thing to do. Just slight evolutions rather revolutions.
Yeah,
as Alan likes to say.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't have a huge department for research and development, so I had to look for the most optimal way of doing it. So we didn't change too much and thought then the design would work as intended, as it used to do. But we didn't just change everything. So, it was quite interesting. The case back we also changed in that way that the Anycar system or the bayonet used for Anycar could be introduced in any kind of orientation into the watch case. And then you would turn a bit, and the orientation of the case back would be different depending on who would introduce it into the case. So we made some kind of foolproof system, so the case back can be only introduced into the case in one orientation. Then you can only turn in one direction, and it's like a camera lens, more or less.
Okay, so I think we talked about this at the fair as well, and I said it sounds, and I think our listeners will know what I mean by when I say this, it sounds like the Naiad system from Omega. Yeah,
it's interesting that you say that. I recently also found out I did a lot of research on patents also, because we were doing basically a new closure system, and we wanted to see that we do not cross any patents by big companies. And then we while researching through, I think, 2,000 patents, where during lockdown we had an online session with the patent office of Bern in Switzerland, and we went through everything.
That sounds absolutely scintillating. Yeah, what a great way to spend an afternoon.
1 liter of coffee and crazy. But Dominic Büser and Cyrano Devonte, me, and one officer of the patent office, we went through that. And we also looked at that patent of Omega, because they brought back the, what do you call it, NIAD, right?
Yeah. NIAD, yeah.
NIAD system, which is some kind of bayonet system. And interestingly enough, at the old NIAD system, they only also had crowns, which were in a way compressor crowns. Also very interesting. A different compressor design than the one I revived, but well, quite interesting to see what was out there. I mean, the 1950s, 60s, I think, were very innovative, and people should not, put them off like old tech, blah blah. No. In the 1950s, 60s, people did crazy things, and I'm in deep awe of what, for example, EPSA did at that time. Yeah, I have to be honest.
So when you say they just had crowns, you mean they just had push-down crowns? They didn't have screw-down crowns?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Is it just a coincidence then the NIAD system was paired with that? Because, I mean, I guess the original NIAD wasn't a compressor, was it?
Mm-hmm. I think the original NIAD was not, but at that time there were different ideas how to do crowns, and one of them was this special system used by Omega. But Omega also used EPSA cases in many models, but I think they never used compressor crowns from EPSA. Yeah. So I did a technical update in that sense, and of course I'm an engineer, and I think I was quite confident this would work. But I mean, everything can go wrong. So after the first tests done by the case maker, which has all the machines you need for waterproof testing, and it's fulfilled 200 meters, which means 25 bars in water. The technical development guy of the case maker told me, Mr. Klocke, to be honest, I've done 900 cases for watches in my life in the past decades. I've never seen anything that we did for you, and I would never have bet a penny that this would work.
How interesting. Because I was going to ask you, I'm very, very curious. On the dial, it says Sherpa, Ultra Dive Automatic. It doesn't have a depth rating, although it's very clearly stated on the website, 20 bar of water pressure. But we all know that every watch that bears whatever rating has not just been tested or has not just been constructed to meet that criteria. It can generally go much further. Have you tested these watches to absolute failure?
I haven't, to be honest. I mean,
you should.
Yeah. I mean, first things first. So basically, if you have some kind of pressure rating, you need to test, of course. But if you have meter rating on it, like 200 meters, then it means that you have to have a certification to the diving watch norm, which is ISO 6425, and to have to test according to that. I have tested them and certified them according to ISO 6425. Not all the sub tests. We only did, only in what do you call brackets or yeah. So we did the testing for the depth rating. So they are tested for 25 bars in water, which is 1 hour. Actually, we test to 2 hours in 200 meters and 250 meters, more or less, like 25 bars. And then you have a condensation test. So afterwards, you take the watch out. They're on the heating plate. And after the heating plate, you put a very cold, wet sponge on top and see if there's any kind of condensation, which would indicate that there's some kind of slight leak in the watch. So we do certify, but so far I've never tested to failure. Maybe I should do it once. I would guess the glass would fail first. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suppose it might, but I mean, it's a fascinating thing to test. You know, I know like no watchmaker likes to see their watches explode, but it's fun for the rest of us and see exactly how deep a watch of this construction could go. Because I have to say, and I'll say this with all honesty to the listeners, I've held thousands of watches in my life, as you know, and worked on a great many of them. And I've always had a very large soft spot for dive watches, and the manufacturing in the case and the dial, the printing, the loom, the hands, everything on this watch is exceptional. Its retail price is €5,900, including 19% VAT, which might seem high to some people that were expecting a new brand back on the scene to come in at a very aggressive price. But I say this, it's worth it because the machining is so exceptional. It feels so indestructible. I reckon it could go beyond 500 easily. I think it could really surprise us. I think it could get to 6, and I'd love to see where it finally gave up the ghost.
Yeah.
And blew.
So interesting. I would say, so the crowns, I'm sure the crowns would withstand 500 meters, no problem, because the design is so special. The glass, I'm not so sure. The glass, maybe my gut feeling would say maybe 300 meters. The case back also at some stage would deform. We were speaking about thickness, etc. before, yeah?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how far it would go. Maybe I take this as an inspiration and I will ask. But I would like to do 2 things. One would be a complete watch. And one thing I would really love to test is how far the crown system could go. My gut feeling would say the crown system goes as far as the tube would go, and the tube will collapse at one stage, but I don't know when. I didn't have, let's say, the time and the budget yet to do that, but yeah, I will take I will do it.
Awesome. So let's talk about some of the very specific aesthetic details of these watches, because I was always a fan of the Enika Sherpa as well, but you've taken that concept and just improved it manyfold in so many ways. I mean, you've retained one of my favorite little quirks from some of the original models, and that's the lollipop hand. That's on the stainless steel model, and you've got the orange of the double lollipop. Yeah, if anyone's not seen this, it's not just a regular lollipop. It's a teeny tiny lollipop and then a slightly bigger lollipop halfway along the second hand. It's a lovely little visual tick. I absolutely adore it. And then you've got the orange, the all orange, much more sporty style hand on the black model. And the black model, where the steel case is polished, the black is matte blasted and looks absolutely beautiful, very stealthy. But the interesting thing about this orange is that it's luminous, isn't it?
Yeah, so in a way, I was so passionate and in love with these old watches. I looked at every part. People would think, you have an existing watch, you just take it and redo it. It's so simple, blah, blah, and that's it, No, because, we didn't have the tools anymore. So basically, we had to do a new design anyway. Of course, you could do it the same way it used to be, but in many areas, I realized people would expect if you do the first decision after knowing that most of the supply chain of many cheaper brands is based in Asia, that I didn't want to do it, would mean in the end that the price of the watches were going to be quite high. So all of my supply chain is in Germany and in Switzerland, which is different to many brands, especially all the small brands coming out with watches around, 1,500 to 3,000 euros, I would guess, So I knew I would be in the pricing quite high because of my supply chain. And then I thought, I cannot do the plexiglass again, because people would expect to be better. So I looked at how to do a very good box glass imitation, I would say, of a very domed plexi. I found Sebal as a very good glass maker in Switzerland. And we especially took care of the fact that it looks like very similar to plexi, and it doesn't have this kind of milky shade around the perimeter like you would see on an Omega Speedmaster Moon when it has the sapphire. So we did a black metallization on the bottom to catch the reflections. We did a lot of things, and we did that to all the parts. So every part I looked at, what would Mr. Racine, the family of Enika, or Mr. Piqueret of EPSA, what would they do now to have a similar design but be up to date? And for example, the orange was another case. Back then, the bezels and hands, they would feature day glow paint, but just paint in some of the watches. So then I looked and talked in detail with RC Tritech, the company doing Superluminova, and we found that we could mix day glow and night glow, Superluminova, and have this special Sherpa orange, which we actually developed together. They developed to me. And so now we have not only orange, but it's actually at nighttime also orange. Yeah. So that's one of the details.
Let's talk a little bit more, just draw attention to, once again, this black metallized ring beneath the outside edge of the crystal. Now, our listeners, although your explanation was perfectly sufficient when you know what it is, will probably not have heard about this before. And it's an interesting workaround to solve an aesthetic problem that very few brands, in fact, zero in my experience that I know of, have ever bothered to attack. And what it does is it makes the clarity of the dial so much greater. It's a very odd effect. It sort of expands the dial slightly, so you feel like the crystal is almost not there, but from certain angles you can see it, and you get a really interesting perspective on it. How many iterations of that did you have to go through, and how did you really come up with that idea? Was it straight away moment of genius, or did you have to try quite a lot of things to try and get rid of that milky edge that you spoke of?
Basically, I raised the issue. I didn't want to have it, so we tried to make sure that the design helps doing this. But then I have to be very honest, my supplier, Sebal, they work together with a coating company doing the anti-reflex, and they can also do metallization. And they said, we've seen this and this before, you might try this. So basically it was their suggestion, which I'm very thankful for. It's also a very good glass maker. They make the whole raw sapphire also in Switzerland, and all the other process steps also. Yeah, a small family-led company. I love that. So basically, it didn't take us a lot of iterations, maybe one or two. That was one of the least problematic. Sometimes it's like that, And in the end, the look is quite special because you have actually the black metallization is a part of the glass. It is a very thin layer on the glass on the bottom. And it has a special effect. People have to see it. It's, if you look from the glass from the top, it looks like a deep piano black varnish in a way. Yeah, so it's quite nice. It's worth it to look at it.
It's really crisp. It's a lovely, lovely visual effect. Now, talking of visual effects, there's a lot of differences between the stainless steel and the black model, more than one might initially realize. It's not just the seconds hand, it's not even just the case coating, it's also the dial. So it's all printed on the black one, right? It's a flatter, more geometric style. And then on the stainless steel, you've got the applied and polished indices, which is much more traditional, I would say. And then on the black one, you even have a different internal bezel in terms of design. What are the models that inspired these two iterations specifically?
Actually, they bear the same name. So the original was the Inika Sherpa OPS or OPS, and the original other one was the Inika Sherpa Ultra Dive, a watch which was, by the way, worn by Alain Delon in 2 or 3 movies, at least 2, and also in his private life. So you see some of the photos of Alain Delon wearing this watch. So they were inexistent with the same name, which were also not registered. So I registered the product names as trademarks, and I also made sure that all the old IP regarding design was long gone. It's gone more than 60, 70 years. So it's free. And then we made the new watches, of course, but they're very close to the originals. They're not exact copies, as you also mentioned, but they are very easily recognizable. So basically, we took the original design, which I loved, so I tried to make it the best version of them today.
Well, I think you've achieved. I'm not just saying that because I've been a fan of the Inika Sherpa for a long time. Now, quickly, the logo. We had a good laugh about this in Helsinki when I asked if you had deliberately sort of taken the logo of Inika, which for anyone that doesn't know was basically a ringed planet like Saturn. It looked like
it's a Saturn, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks the Sherpa logo because it's like a crescent moon, really on its back with the circle up top. It looks like you've just pulled the rings of Saturn down over the moon and put it on the dial. And I thought it's a lovely perhaps an intentional callback, but something that has this great symmetry to it. It really feels like this is the evolution of the Erekas Sherpa, but to the name as well, because this goes beyond watchmaking. This goes to your culture, your faith. You're a Tibetan Buddhist, correct?
Right. So this really touches a very deep and complex matter, because I mean, looking at the logo. So I had Sherpa as a name, and it was clear for me that I wanted to do something. If I put Sherpa on the watch, it should have something to do with the Sherpas. So it should also have something in the watch. And for example, the logo is actually a Buddhist symbol, a bit abstract, but it's mainly it's a sun disk and the crescent moon put together, which means that you try to use compassion and wisdom together to be as useful for the world as you can be. Now that's why how this logo came about. So I really loved that idea with the logo, and when I put it on the watch and looked at it for the first time, I thought, wow, it looks like you said, as if I took the two circles of the Saturn and sort of turned it around a bit and then had the new logo. But that was actually not intentional. So it's quite funny. So there are two things that I wanted to do. I wanted to give something back, because the Sherpas, even today, they do all that crazy work for all the people who want to be on top of the world. And they usually do not get the full credit for that. And so we support two projects in the Sherpa region. You can find them on the website. So I just mentioned them shortly. There's one project which I support where they rebuild a school in the Sherpa region for little school children in the countryside, which is very poor. And the school was destroyed in 2013 in the earthquake. And then I support another project in Namche Bazaar, which is the closest town to Emperor's Base Camp. Mm-hmm. And they collect garbage, sort it, and pack it in little bags and give it to tourists to carry them back to the airport, which I think is a really nice, not saving the world, but saving locally a grassroots operation, which I really love. So we also support that. But then I also thought, as you said, I'm Tibetan Buddhist, and the Sherpas are Tibetans living in Nepal, Tibetan Buddhists, and they're known to stay calm in every situation on the mountains. And they do that because they say mantras and they have this attitude of calmness. I thought, I want to do something that is inside of the watch. So the Tibetans also use prayer wheels, sometimes small ones that they have in their hand and rotate, especially old people or monks. Or sometimes around the big stupas in Nepal or in Tibet, they have these big wheels. When you pass by, you can just turn them and they turn the mantras and spread good vibration to the world. So I had this idea, but like the watch with a compressor watch, I look at the watch, it has to be a compressor watch and the real one. I wanted to make sure that this is just not a marketing feature, but it's real. So I asked high teacher of my lineage, Buddhist lineage, if this idea is crazy and just for marketing, or if it's actually a real Buddhist traditional feature. And I showed him the plans and what I wanted to do. And he said, yeah, the idea is good and it's beneficial for people and it's also good for non-Buddhists, for everybody. But your plans are unfortunately wrong. We have to correct them. So he made a new drawing. He told me which kind of wheels I could use. Then I went out, bought these wheels first just as spare parts. And then when I received them, it's the anchor wheel and the seconds wheel of the movement. I realized they're really, really tiny and there's hardly any space to write on it. And I was pretty shocked, to be honest. But then I found through a laser manufacturer, I found a laser engraver nearby in Solingen, which is the town of the best knives in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
That company engraves high-quality knives. And so we started the first trials. First trials looked like, a tattoo after 60 years in Mallorca on the beach. Completely blown out. And then took us more or less a year and one new laser generation, which arrived during that, to make it really crisp. So if you look at my website, it's a mantra. Tibetan mantra written in 0.15 millimeter height.
Right, you have to check this out because this is really something you have to see with your own eyes. Martin's website is sherpawatches.com. That's SHERPAWATCHES.com. And it's a beautiful website. You clearly know your stuff when it comes to that side of things. It works wonderfully. If you just scroll down the page or click straight away on the Mantramatic heading at the top, you'll be taken to this section that shows you exactly the kind of scale that we're talking about when we're working with these components. There's an escape wheel laying next to the head of a match, and they're even smaller than I remember. And the seconds wheel is something else. I mean, the engraving on that is ridiculous. So how many times does that rotate in a day?
Oh, then you asked something. In a day, I calculated that they rotate more than 30 million mantras per year, which means roughly one per second. So per day, we would have 60 times 60, which is 3,600. And then by 24, okay, I don't know. I'm very bad in calculating by head.
86,400, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah. So that's per day, roughly. Yeah. So, and that's something which is really nice to know. So whatever you do with your watch on the wrist, it will send out good vibrations to everybody. And it's the first spiritual complication in a watch, I would say. I've never heard of it or seen it before. But we wouldn't put it into the face of people. So it's inside of the movement. It's a very nicely finished, gold-plated, highly decorated movement based on Celita, SW200/1, top regulated. We take it apart half, take out the wheels, have them lasered, put them back in, regulate the movement, and have our own rotor on it. The rotor also says, "May all beings be happy and free." Also good wishes. So the movement tries to use nearly every movement of itself to spread out good wishes.
Well, that is a beautiful place to end our interview with the industry's first, as far as we know, it's spiritual complication. Martin, thanks for joining me, mate. It's a pleasure to meet you so recently and then to get on the airwaves together as soon as we've managed to, and I look forward to this episode coming out. If you have any questions for Martin or questions for future shows, please get in touch. You can do so via Instagram. I'm there at RobNuds, ROBNUDDS. My regular co-host can be found at Alon Ben Joseph, that's ALONBENJOSEPH, or you can contact us via email, either rob@therealtime.show or alon@therealtime.show. Alternatively, you can use our contact form on the website, which is www.therealtime.show. We'll be back next week with more watchmaking content, so please tune in then, like, follow, subscribe, share the podcast with all your friends, stay safe, and keep on ticking.